You are listening to the Space-Tastic Mysteries podcast. We are continuing Anna Gale Line's third novel in the Jaguar and Peacock series, Lost on Planet M-142. Trapped on the hostile world of Planet M-142, Commander Jessa Peacock, Masters of the Intergalactic Intelligence Bureau, has spent 3 grueling months undercover, investigating a mysterious cult led by the enigmatic blind prophet, Danielle Jabot. Is Jabot a visionary, a fraud, or something far more dangerous? The deeper Jessa digs, the more tangled the web becomes: secrets, deception, and whispers of an impending assassination. When her husband and fellow operative, Nate Masters, finally joins her, their mission takes a deadly turn. Someone wants Danielle Jabot dead, and the list of suspects is as vast as the stars. As Jessa and Nate race against time, they must navigate a treacherous world of fanatic followers, shadowy enemies, and their own rekindled partnership. With every step closer to the truth, one question looms: is Jabot the target, or the mastermind? This is episode 7, Memories. If you have not subscribed, do so now, and hit the bell to be notified of new episodes.
What is that smell? I demanded the next morning, wrinkling my nose. I sidestepped wood and glass debris from the trailer explosion. It's itronium, a chemical primarily found on Charlie 8. Nate maneuvered around the piece of door I just bypassed. If a person is exposed to it, say in an explosion, they will develop a high fever and red blisters on the extremities. We walked in silence for a moment before he added in a grave tone, "It is highly contagious. It's treatable with antibiotics that have bad temporary effects on the memory." I glanced back at him. "I am aware of that. That's how I..." His voice trailed off. "Lost your memory?" "Yes. I am not sure if you were exposed in the trailer explosion or if you caught it from me." He stopped and stepped in front of me. "You have memory loss too. You would have to, if you were exposed." I shook my head and revealed, "I didn't respond to the antibiotics at all." "Then how are you standing here today?" "A few years ago, I saw an entire village taken out due to itronium exposure." Nate looked me up and down slowly and advised me, "By the time we got the antibiotics to them, it was too late." "I don't know," I answered, scratching my head and shrugging. "I put the cream on that Dr. Manning prescribed, but it didn't seem to work. Maybe something in the cream blocked the itronium's effects." "I don't know about that. I was asleep for 10 days straight. That's better than being dead like that village on Charlie 8. I hit my comlet, the communication device around my wrist, 3 times, signaling a medical emergency. "If it is as highly contagious as you say, I have to inform Dr. Manning." "Yes, Colonel, what is your emergency?" came Dr. Manning's annoyed voice. "The chemical itronium that the Lieutenant Colonel and I were exposed to is highly contagious," I reported. "Colonel, I am quite aware that if you had not gone to that forsaken planet that we would not have an epidemic on our hands." I observed the shock expression on Nate's face. "My children," I started. "Because of your neglect, your family is suffering the effects of your exposure to itronium. That will be quite enough from you," I told the android. I tucked my hair behind my ear, glancing over at Nate, who chuckled. I hissed, "Criticizing me for doing my job is not winning you points with me, you know. Someone needs to bring you down a peg or 2. You have such a big head to match your enormous ego." I closed my eyes for a few seconds, counting to 10 under my breath. "Listen, doctor, use the cream on their blisters and let them sleep it off. Something in it blocks the effects of the itronium." "Who is the doctor here, you or me?" "And no thanks to you, your family is doing much better. You know, I think you have a virus in your program that is making you crabby." "I am not amused by your joke. It wasn't meant to be a joke. It was meant as a warning. If you don't can the attitude, I am going to do something drastic." "Like transfer me out?" "I wouldn't give you the satisfaction." I ended the transmission and yelled, "Androids." "You weren't exaggerating about him," Nate noted, motioning toward the comlet. "How could I? He has a mouth the size of the Grand Canyon." I brought my Quan pad out from behind my back, touching a few screens. I handed it to Nate, contending, These are the pictures that we took of the scene from both bombings. After he seized it, I added, "You look those over while I go talk to the kids." I walked away from him as he studied the photos intently. When I returned a few minutes later, he was still scrutinizing them. "Find anything interesting?" Nate peered up at me, his lips turning upward into a smile. "How are the kids?" "Missing us, but otherwise doing well. I can't believe how fast Reggie started calling you Papa." Confusion set in for a moment before reality dawned on Nate. "I can't believe I am someone's papa." He tilted his head and stared at me. He asserted, "Reggie calls me Papa. Until recently, she was calling you Uncle Nate." I shaded my eyes with my hand. The sun beat down on me. I smiled brightly before interjecting, "She believed you walked on water, until we got married. How does she feel about me now?" I twisted my mouth and put my finger to my lips. "How does she put it?" I responded, catching his gaze. "Oh yes, you are the father that Ben chose to raise her, and Daddy always knows best. She's definitely Ben's child. Looks like me, acts like him." I closed the gap between us and prompted, "What did you find in the pictures?" I think I pinpointed the location of the bombs. "Where?" "Judging from the extent of the damage and where it's located, I'd say that the first blast had to occur," Nate continued, tapping the quan pad, "near the street that separates the Mercantile from the business quad." "And the second one?" "Right outside the trailer. Close enough to scare the people but not close enough to kill anyone." He pointed to the trailer on the quan pad and assessed, "I think that both blasts were made by the same person or persons." "The chemical itronium was used in both blasts," I noted, spotting something shiny a few feet away. "Maybe the person's intent was to cause an epidemic." I reached in my jacket and pulled out a handkerchief. With it in hand, I picked up the object. I then regarded it. Copper wiring of some sort. From the bomb, I concluded. I gave it to Nate to inspect. "Which still brings us to who would want to blow up Star Oak," Nate decided, turning the wiring over and over in his hand, looking at it from all angles. "This is not just copper. It is copper ingenious to Earth's colonies, especially Echo 6. That narrows it down to anyone who visited, lived on or knows someone on Echo 6. That could be everyone on this planet." Raising the copper wiring in the air, he laughed. "The real stuff, like this, is only sold in 4 stores. 3 on Echo 6 and 1 on Charlie 8. Even if we trace it down to the store, we'd have to get a list of who purchased copper wiring recently." He shook his head, smirking. "No, each have a code imprinted on them for tracking purposes." He moved the wiring around in his hand again, determined, "This one is in fairly good shape considering the blast. All you have to do, then, is read the code and track down the store that sold that code," I inferred, running my fingers through my hair. Nate held the wiring up to the sun. "The code is ES3N56P258. He lowered his arm and looked at me and deciphered, "The ES means we are dealing with a store on Echo 6. 3 indicates that it is the 3rd store." He slid his arms around my waist, pressing me against his chest. "We did it," he whispered next to my ear. After holding me tight for a few seconds, he suggested, "Let's go home and track this person down." Breaking away from his embrace, I led him back to the apartment. I smiled all the way. Nate and the kids were recovering. We were about to track down the bomber, and we were going to wrap this case up and go home. Or so I thought. "Does the name Take Lewis mean anything to you?" Nate pulled out a chair from the dining area table. He took a seat, plopping down his quan pad. Sitting across from him, I rested my chin on my fists. I shook my head. "I know most of the people in town, and know Take Lewis has lived here in at least 2 of their years. Take Lewis could be the guy who bought the copper wiring. Someone else, someone who lives here, put together the bomb. Or, the person could be operating under an assumed name." The shopkeeper described Take Lewis as being tall, lanky, and blonde. Incredibly good-looking. I drew my bottom lip into my mouth, chewing on it. Could it be? No, why would he? It couldn't be. Well, he did act strangely the last time Nate and I talked to him. Nate studied my face for a moment before uttering, "You have someone in mind, don't you?" I pinched my eyes together and returned, "Saber March, the grocer I told you about." "The guy I dreamed you left me for," exclaimed Nate, slamming his fist down on the table. His face turned a strange color of red. "Jag, it's not a big deal. He has a little crush on me, that's all." Nate stood up and walked behind the chair. "I don't know why, but I feel like I've had this conversation before." He faced me, rubbing the muscles in the back of his neck. "That's right," I responded in a low tone, barely above a whisper. I caught his eye. Those gorgeous cappuccino-colored eyes mesmerized me for a few seconds. Right in front of the mercantile when you and I went to question him. What did I say? You were convinced that it was an obsession. I still am, he admitted. He grabbed the back of the chair and leaned forward, noting, "I don't know how, but I am. I'll tell you the same thing I told you before, I will not allow myself to be alone with him." "Now that that's settled," Nate announced, walking back to the front of his chair. He sat down. I stood up and walked over to the phone that was mounted to the dining area wall. Picking up the receiver, I punched in a few numbers. After a few seconds, a familiar baritone voice greeted, "Good morning, March Mercantile." I could hear people talking in the background. "Good morning to you too, Saber. This is Jada Williams. I am working on a project," I spoke into the receiver, "and I need your help." "Mr. March, do you have any potatoes?" an older female inquired, slamming her fist on the table. "I'll be right with you, Ms. Linus," Saber told a customer. Nate waved me down frantically. A scowl on his face. I turned my back on him, facing the window in the living room. "Sure, anything for you. I am in need of some copper wiring. I've only seen this type of particular wiring on Earth's colonies." A silence erupted from the other side of the phone. "Saber? You still there?" I questioned. "Yeah, I'm still here." He cleared his throat and said in a low voice, "Listen, I don't have that particular wiring in stock, but I can order it for you. I know this supplier on Echo 6. You can have it in a few days." "That's great. Thanks. But this has to be our little secret." I nodded. "I understand. Thanks again." I spun on my heel and replaced the phone, then moved back toward the table. I sat down in my chair, wearing a self-satisfied smile. "Peek, don't keep me in suspense. What did you find out?" I glanced over at Nate, running my tongue over my teeth. "I thought you didn't want me talking to him," I quipped, then twisted my mouth. "You know, I think I'll just keep this information to myself." "Peek," Nate muttered, wrinkling his forehead. "What did he say?" "He said he didn't have the wiring in stock, but he knows a dealer on Echo 6 that he can order it from. That connects Saber March to the bomb. Now we need to figure out his motive." Nate reached across the table to touch my hand, smiling adoringly into my eyes, then wondered, what would make a man want to kill an entire town? "What do we know about this Take Lewis? Saber March, whatever his name is?" "Very little. Born here on planet M-142 at Centrum Memorial. Given up for adoption when he was hours old. Lived on Echo 6 until he was 18. Why would he return here? Maybe to find his birth parents." "Exactly. And what if his birth parents weren't what he was expecting? Maybe they were someone he knew." "Whatever the case, I think we should interview his friends and family to get a better idea of who we are dealing with," I suggested, standing up again and heading into the kitchen. "Would you like something to eat?" I glanced down at my watch and remarked, "It's already 1,400 hours, and I haven't eaten anything today." "Peek, you can't be treating my baby like that. She needs nourishment." "You haven't eaten yet either," I called back, looking over my shoulder at him. I opened the refrigerator door and surveyed the contents. I grabbed the carton of eggs, tomatoes, potatoes, zucchinis, mushrooms, cheese and spinach. I carried the load over to the counter, kicking the refrigerator door shut with my foot. I am making omelets. Do you want some? Sounds good. Do you need any help? He questioned as he joined me at the counter. I handed him the zucchini. You can slice these. I pulled open the drawer nearest to the refrigerator. I retrieved a potato peeler. After shutting the drawer, I moved the peeler over the potato, ripping its skin off. Nate sliced the zucchini while I peeled another potato. We worked in silence for a few minutes before I caught Nate staring at his wedding band, smiling. He reminded me of a woman admiring her engagement ring. I can't believe I'm actually married to you. I dreamed of it, yes, but I never imagined that I would actually be your husband, he finally commented, glancing over at me as he chopped the zucchini. The last thing I remember is standing outside the car and listening to you announce that Ben had proposed. He licked his lips, looking intensively at the knife in his hand and recalled, all I kept thinking was, is she really in love with Ben? He peered at me again. Were you? If you remember that day, you already know the answer, I replied, never looking up at him. Instead, I reached over and snatched a knife from the knife holder. I slid the knife in one of the potatoes, cutting it into smaller pieces. Peek, I knew you felt the same way about me as I did about you. Still clutching the knife in my hand, I swung around to face him. Then why, when I asked you for one good reason not to marry Ben, did you say, welcome to the family? He studied my face, reaching out to touch my cheek. I pushed his hand away. Tell me. I was scared. I had never felt about anyone the way I felt and still feel about you. He looked away from me to stare at something on the wall behind me. When his eyes met mine again, I could sense a hidden pain in them. I dated a lot of women. I just couldn't trust myself to be the kind of man you deserved. And I love you too much to put you through that. My lips inched into a smile, shaking my head. But you aren't that man anymore, at least in 2151, you aren't. I can't remember any of it, our wedding, how I proposed, our kids. A few months ago, either could I. I laid down the knife and closed the gap between us. You showed me a video of our wedding. I don't have any videos with me, so this will have to do. I put my fingers under the chain around my neck, pulling out my locket. I opened it. I love you, Angel, came Ben's greeting. Pointing to the locket, Nate asked, is that Ben? I nodded, thrusting the locket toward him, voicing, this is our family. He held it in his hand, scrutinizing it. I recognized Joey, that's that guy she just started seeing. Charlie, Cody, no Colin, you, me. I am assuming that the miniature version of you is Reggie. The blonde boy must be Remy. He squinted and observed, he looks a lot like a girl I used to know. Brooklyn Curzon. He glanced at me. How did you know? He looked back at the picture and inquired, he can't be mine. She and I never, you know. Brooklyn Curzon tried to say he was, but you have repeatedly told me you never slept with Brooklyn. I wrinkled my nose, holding air in my mouth as if I were going to vomit. She was assaulted during her marriage. I am going to dread ever telling Remy that. Nate put his hands under my hair and cradled my face. We will tell him together when the time comes, he whispered, leaning in and kissing me full on the lips.